Hello and welcome to Marshall Matters with me, Winston Marshall. Today I am joined from California by one of the greatest American songwriters of all time, Don McLean. Don's songs have resonated through the ages and have been covered by the likes of Madonna, George Michael, Ed Sheeran and Elvis Presley. And I Love You So, Vincent and of course American Pie are all firm favourites in the American songbook. The latter, American Pie, released 50 years ago in 1971, might even be considered an alternative national anthem. It was voted number 5 Song of the 20th Century in the US. The original working manuscript from American Pie sold for $1.2 million at Christie's. This is testament not only to the power of Don's music, but to the power of his lyrics. Don, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. What a lovely introduction.
I'm genuinely thrilled. I remember singing your songs even as a boy. I have a memory of being at a wedding, age 5 or 6, and seeing all the adults taking their ties off, the men taking their ties off, dancing on the table, singing American Pie.
Yeah, that has the effect on people. It's party time.
Yeah, exactly. It must be unbelievable to have a song even resonate with one other person, but to resonate with so many people year after year, decade after decade. It's very few songwriters could even imagine having that experience.
Well, I guess it has a sort of a prismatic effect. You know, you see things in it as you grow older, and it stays with people. I had a lot of fun writing the song, and actually all the songs on the American Pie album and making that album was magic. Even the cover was fantastic. The guy that took that the cover is almost as famous as the song. So yeah, it was a very wonderful time, and I was, immersed in a world of a lot of contradictions, because there was a lot of music being made, a lot of really good music, and there was a lot of very ugly political stuff in the streets, people getting tear gassed and terrible riots, and it had been going on for years and years in America. It was a really wide open town, and I made my first album in Berkeley, California, and
Tapestry.
The guys would come, when they'd been gassed by the police.
Wow.
When they got to the session. So you were right in the middle of it.
So your first 2 albums, Tapestry and American Pie, and they were made at the tail end of the civil rights movement, is what you're referring to.
And the AntiWar Movement.
And the AntiWar Movement. So this is the height of the Vietnam War.
Civil rights movement morphed into the anti-war movement in a strange way. It's kind of like Prohibition morphed into women's rights back in the 1930s or 20s. It just happens that way. Things don't stay static. And but it was very tumultuous, and so I was caught up in that, and I was really, I think, took my job seriously, as a songwriter and a singer, because I knew how much a song could mean to people if it was the right song. And so I took it seriously. I didn't see it as being an entertainer or, particularly a showbizy type of a person. I saw it, I like entertaining people and I like singing for them, but there was always information, that I'd like to get across, whether it was a song about poverty or a song about the environment or whatever.
You've got very beautiful songs about Vietnam War, 1967 one, and
yes,
The Grave as well.
Yes.
And were those, I think actually George Michael sang a very beautiful version of The Grave, but were those songs protest songs as well. I mean, they're clearly mournful and lamenting the tragedy of war.
Well, you know, a protest song, Dylan called those finger pointing songs. They're different, really, from those two songs that you mentioned, because they're portraits, really, of relationships. In 1967, you know, it's his buddy Joe who was brought back in plastic, and he talks about it. And the other song is a man, you know, it's a dream that I had, you know, that I was in a foxhole and all of a sudden I was in my own grave, you know, and I realized that I wonder how many guys, you know, in the middle of this horrible experience realize, holy mackerel, you know, I'm already 8 feet underground, you know, and gonna, if I die here, I'm already buried, you know, and so it's these kind of concepts rather than pointing the finger at LBJ or Nixon, which was very hard not to do, you know, in those days. But
so was it about capturing the mood of the time, and was there did you sense a sort of responsibility in collecting?
Well, the human aspect, you know, it's the humanity of it, rather than the abstraction of, you know, this is wrong and we must end this and this kind of thing, you know. It's making it human. And that's always the key, you know, to any great movie. It doesn't matter what it is. It still comes down to personalities and the interaction between characters.
There's someone really want to ask you about, because I believe, a friend of yours in that period, and it's Pete Seeger. And I'm sure the Spectator won't be thrilled about me promoting famous communists, but he wrote a brilliant book on banjos, which for me helped me when I was starting the banjo, and I still would recommend it absolutely to anyone wanting to start that instrument. But am I right understanding he was a friend of yours?
Yes, he helped me get my start. I wrote How to Play the 5-String Banjo. That was a little book that he put out in the 1940s. I think he mimeographed the first ones.
Yeah.
And he was very good at finding wood cuttings and different artistic things to put in there. He was an excellent teacher. He really was a teacher more than anything. And he wrote a book about how to play the guitar and how to play the steel drums and how to make the steel drums out of an oil drum.
Yeah.
So, you know, he liked to pass this information on and get these books made. And but the fun for me was that I had been writing him since maybe junior high school, because I fell in love with the Weavers, and I still am in love with the Weavers, and I knew all of them, got to know them very well. And back then, you know, I read how they had been blacklisted as a little boy, you know, 14 years old in New Rochelle, New York. I didn't know anything about the blacklist, you know. That was much too intellectual for me. But what I did was I wrote away to Washington and asked for transcripts of the House on Un-American Activities Committee. And they sent me a big box from Washington. And I was 15 at the time, and it got delivered, and my mother said, "Donnie, what is this?" You know, I said, "Oh, just some stuff from Washington. I want to see what they're saying and what kind of questions they're getting asked, you know." And so that's how deep I would get into things. I'm still that way today, you know. If I have a pursuit, I'll get way into it, you know, all the way. So the next step really was I had to get to know these people. So I called Fred Hellerman, who was the guitar player in the group, on the phone, and just cold called him when I was 15 and got to be his friend. And every month or two, I would give him a call and talk to him. And he was very nice. And next thing I knew, I got to know Lee Hayes, and then Eric Darling, who was the replacement for Pete Seeger in the Weavers, a tremendous banjo player. And so the fun was watching them play, because I was there sitting And I would ask him, how do you do this? How do you wear your finger picks? How do you get that? And it would show me exactly how he did it. And the same thing happened with Pete. So I would say, how do you do that? You know, and he was, oh, it's just like this, you know, and it was the most wonderful thing, you know, to have the man right there, because, you know, you used to have to watch if they were on TV and try to figure out what was going on. And it's very hard to know from a book, you know, how something's supposed to sound. But when you're right there and you hear it, and then you say, how do you do that? And he shows you. I mean, I'm telling you, it was the most fun. And I love the 5-string banjo. I'm glad that you play that. You play that instrument.
Yeah.
And I played it a lot back in the 1960s and 70s. In fact, I used to do recording sessions. I'm on a bunch of records. I'm on some Clancy Brothers albums, and I'm on a Redbone album, Leon Redbone. There's one called On the Track, and I play on Polly Wolly Doodle.
Playing banjo.
And I do some damn good work on Polly Wolly Doodle, I got to say.
It sounds like a very encouraging and nurturing environment that you were in from a very young age.
Oh, yes. I was used to having everything knocked down by my father. My father and mother really didn't know anything about show business or any of that. I can't tell you how far away they were. They were really nice people and very good parents, and they loved me a lot. But there was not a lot of joy in the house. So this music, you know, brought this wonderful joy to me, you know, their singing. And then I discovered so many other artists as a result. And, you know, Josh White and the way he would play guitar still fascinates me. And so many others. And, of course, I loved electric guitar, too. That's why I love Buddy Holly, you know, and
Yeah.
I loved great singers. So I loved Elvis Presley and Marty Robbins and Roy Orbison. So I was full of music, and, you know, and I really didn't know where to turn. You know, what did I want to do? Did I want to be in a group? Did I want to be by myself?
Mm-hmm.
I thought at one point I wanted to be a flamenco guitar player. I love Carlos Montoya. You know, I realized how hard that was. And the folk thing, you know, kind of suited me because you could do a lot of different things. And the same with the banjo. You could have a lot of different strums and techniques and things that you could use. So I got good at collecting those, you know, having more and more of those. Mm. And then the folk thing came along with little nightclubs everywhere, you know, where you could go in, and there were a lot of people like me, you know, who didn't do much. They weren't that good. They were learning.
Would this be in New York City?
Yeah, this would be in New York, but they were all over. They were in colleges, everywhere. There was a little coffee house you would play. You could make $100, you know, and I was supporting my mother at the time, and $120 was her rent. So if I just did one of those, I could almost make her rent for her. And then I was always busy doing these things. And then I became an opening act to all these big stars, you know, like Steppenwolf, and that was in '69, and started to get wider and wider into show business, you know, and with the first album, Tapestry, then it broke loose. Then I was played on the underground radio a lot, FM, and I was doing concerts in colleges and learning how to perform, you know, how do you do this? So I kind of knew how. I was always sort of pretty good, but, you know, I had a lot to learn.
Yeah. I was very curious as well. This might be a small story within it all about your doing the Hudson River. Was it the Sweetwater boat? It seemed to me one of the first environmentalist protests from within the music industry, led by Seeger. But seeing as that's come now is one of the most talked about issues of the day. You were sort of way ahead of your time. 5 decades ahead of your time, really.
Yeah, I had to be there. It was so. I like information, and I'm fascinated with intelligence. There's so much stupidity around now. It really is offensive to me. The things people say and the slogans they believe in, and just so dumb. But he was so interesting to be around because this is before he built his boat, the Hudson River sloop. I helped raise money for that. I got started with him in 1966 when I was still in college. But as I say, I had written him since I had been like 15.
Yeah.
And so he knew about me, and he would always answer my letters. I'd get it maybe a year later, but I'd get an answer. And give me good advice, you know. And so after I finally met all the other weavers, I met him in about 1966, and then again for real in 1968, because the following year I got a job singing on the Hudson River, sponsored by the New York State Council on the Arts, and I sang in every river town, starting where the Hudson starts. So here I was in the middle of this, getting a lot of publicity, and here he was doing this thing. So I met with him, and he was nice enough to include me in some early festivals that they were doing. And then, you know, they would bring scientists out on stage to talk about what was going to happen in 50 years if we didn't straighten out. And here it's 50 years later, and everything they said is happening.
Wow.
Yeah, everything. I go and I see these ice caps melting and see these rivers, the water rising. It's every single thing I knew 50 years ago.
Wow. You said just a moment ago, all these slogans people are now believing. I'd be curious to know what sort of slogans you're referring to then, but I also wanted to ask you, I've heard you say recently that political correctness is a new type of fascism, which I found quite a poignant thing to hear from you, particularly you being friends with Seeger, who was blacklisted by the government.
Yeah. Well, I think, here's what I think. I believe that the Me Too movement started when women, which was an empowering women, and they'd had enough of being exploited in corporate situations. And Harvey Weinstein was a guy who behaved just like Cohen at Columbia Pictures. What was his name? Can't think of it. But these guys were all the casting couch. That's what they did. So, but women had had enough. So he got his. And then they started picking a whole bunch of other people who were doing this kind of thing, and they made examples of them. All good idea to do. You don't have to have this in the environment. That, I think, then you have the death of George Floyd, and then you had this whole thing where black people were just sick and tired of being shot, for doing very little. Over and over this was happening, and finally it was symbolized by... And then, of course, that moved into pulling down these Confederate statues and getting rid of the Confederacy once and for all in their flag, which I find offensive. So I was perfectly on board with that. This is a good thing. And it was, those statues were put up in order to frighten black people and let them know that that the white people still had control in the South, and to, watch your step. And that's what those statues really were for. And so they should come down. And the flag should be not flying on state property and so on. It's the good thing. But now it's started to, I think there's been a certain aspect of this where people are a little bit drunk with power. Well, we'll kill that and we'll kill this. And So in a funny way, you know, I sometimes think, well, we've canceled the environment. You know, we've canceled the animal kingdom. I mean, certainly more than 60% of all the species in the world are gone in the last 50 years. We're canceling the oceans because there's so much nitrogen in plastic that fish can hardly exist. We've canceled God. We've canceled religion. We've canceled civility. We've canceled the English language. You know, in a sense, isn't that what American Pie says? Isn't that the day the music died? Isn't that the day we're in? And so as this song comes back again, you know, which these songs tend to do, it's talking about all of this stuff that's been canceled. It's on this day. You know, this is the day the music died. So that's what I think. And I've seen this coming to some degree with songs like Headroom and Prime Time, you know, which is about seeing all your experience through the television and music being made by robots. I mean, I think that people don't make music really anymore, and that the recording studio lies. You know, the camera and the recording studio are now liars because everything is photoshopped and everything is fixed up and you can't tell. But in the old days, if you went in the studio, you'd better be ready, you know, to do your very best work today, because the meter is running and the other musicians there are very, very good and they don't make mistakes. And you better be at your best. And you don't have to do that anymore. Everything is fixed up later and phoned in and computer part is sent in. So in a sense, my song, coming as it does now, is in a way a sort of an anti-cancel culture anthem in a sense, or at least it's telling people, hey, this is what we're in, you know.
At the beginning of this conversation, you talked about the morphing from the civil rights movement into Vietnam and these things, and now you're describing again in this era the Me Too movement morphing into Black Lives Matter protests. And over there in America, do you, and having gone through both those experiences, do you see parallels between them?
Well, I think the one thing that I can't understand is that the idea of cancel culture and political correctness has made people afraid on both sides to say anything. So this is the big difference, as I see it, between now and those days in the 1960s. Everybody was very out front about how they felt about everything. Today, you really don't know how people feel because they're afraid to say something, because they're afraid they'll be criticized or, you know, they'll offend somebody. Nobody cared about offending anybody in the 1960s. People realized that, you know, their point of view was not going to be agreed to by everybody, and that if that was too bad, well, because we didn't agree with their point of view. So everybody was offended. But now there's this primitive kind of reaction to offending people that has completely closed off the college campuses to comedians, for sure. They can't go on a college campus because they can't say anything, you know, or they're going to offend somebody, and then they're going to get in trouble. Like Dave Chappelle is now the poster boy for that. And I looked at his special, The Closer. I didn't see anything offensive with it. You know, he was very gentle about everything and very funny. But, you know.
But Chappelle is in a similar category to yourself, where he's somewhat uncancelable, and you guys can, I suppose, I think, say what you want. Whereas perhaps there are younger artists, or maybe I should ask, do you think, what are the consequences of this so-called cancel culture for other
See,
artists?
I never thought about that. You know, I said what I wanted to say, and the consequences be damned. And to some real extent, I'm still the same way
Yeah.
because I'm too old, to have any of this hurt me all that much.
Mm.
I roll along, and so I say what I want to say. And but I think that when you have that kind of a chilling effect, where you don't really know what might happen, and especially not if you're an artist, because an artist can always find a home somewhere. But if you're a regular working person, you can imagine the environment in the office. You said something wrong. You made a comment about it. I look good today. I'm telling the boss. I mean, Chris Matthews was one of my favorites. He was on MSNBC for 20 years. Hardball was his show. And he was flirty. He would say, "You look beautiful," or I'm in love with you," or something like that. Got him fired. They just yanked him right out of the seat and took him by the ear and put him in the street for saying benign things, nothing bad at all. So it sends a message. Okay, don't compliment anybody, and more we're closing that civility, and you can't really say anything. And so I think that's a big difference from the 1960s, is that you knew what people offended everybody all the time. Are you kidding? You ever see the Fire Sign Theater? They were a funny group. They did a bunch of albums on Columbia. They were hilarious, and they had all these comedy troupes, that Second City and SNL came out of Saturday Night Live, came out of that, and there was Canada. They had another group of people, and they produced Martin Short and John Candy, and all of those guys came from Canada. They didn't say anything, do anything, and that's what made it so much fun.
Yeah. Well, let's end on a more positive note. What are you excited about, and what is next for Mr. Don McLean?
Well, I've got a lot of work to do. I've got to get this album out next year. I've got to get our children's book launched in April, and we have Peter Gallagher, the television, who's on the show Zoe's List. I don't know what the full name of that is, but he's very popular. He's done the audio book version of it. I've got to do a big world tour, which is going to take me to probably over 100 cities, maybe more. And I've got plenty of other things, going on. And what'll happen is one thing kind of leads to the next. Somebody will pop up somewhere and say, "Oh yeah, well, there's also a Broadway show that they're planning, which will use a lot of my songs in a musical Broadway type of a thing." We've got that all contracted for, and they're out there as well. So
fantastic. Well, Don, thank you so much for your time. I wish you all the best and great success for all these various projects. And
well, great to talk to you, and thank you for having me on your show.
Thank you so much, Don.